Deep in 19th century Louisiana, where bald cypress lean like conspirators over tar-black water and the heat drones like a spell, a rumor still clings to the moss. Not a tale kept in church ledgers or scribbled in town ledgers, but one etched into bone by those who survived to remember its taste. It concerns two sisters, charming, graceful, unfailingly generous, ladies who served courtesy by the pound and something far redder by the slab, because in 1854 the smoke curling from Cypress Hollow's lone chimney carried more than hickory-cured pork. It carried a curse, a craving, and the silent bill America pays when supper tastes too perfect to question. Meet Ullei and Maybel Thibodeaux, the Cannibal Sisters of Louisiana. Before we push open the smokehouse door, tap subscribe on Ancestral Fear, where terror is never fiction, only ignored history. Ring that bell. Some legends were buried for everyone's good. Ready? Come closer. Cypress Hollow was barely a breath in the swamp. 27 clapboard homes, a steepled church, and a post office that doubled as the barber's chair. Most days, the mud chewed at boots. Mosquitoes dimmed the daylight, and every lungful felt like sucking air through soaked burlap. Food was scarce, hunting scarcer. When the rains came, and they always came, roads vanished, and families survived on salt, hymns, and meat when Providence allowed. Except Providence seemed to favor one address. Beyond the trees that knitted too tight for moonlight, where fog sat like a sleeping beast, the Thibodeaux smokehouse exhaled day and night. A sagging roof, soot-black walls, a chimney forever breathing. It belonged to Ullei, sharp-eyed, gliding like a crane, and Maybel, soft-spoken, ribboned, and forever sporting flecks of crimson beneath her nails. The town adored them. Lose a hog to fever? A linen-wrapped parcel of brisket arrived on your stoop. Flood sweep your cabin? Stew thick with dumplings followed. During the famine winter of '53, when chickens perished and deer went mute, the sisters alone kept bellies full. No one probed their larder. Ullei spoke of a trapper cousin upriver shipping barrels of salt meat. Others whispered of feral hog herds in no man's swamp. Questions died quick, because questions bred hunger, and hunger lost every time to the sisters' generosity. On smoke days the chimney belched black fog, seasoning the breeze with pepper, garlic, and something faintly metallic. Villagers let it slide. Only Father Henri, the new priest, crossed himself whenever he caught that undertone. Inside the cottage, refinement reigned. Lace drapes, a piano-shy one ivory, a parlor portrait of their late mother, a grandfather clock ticking perpetually 3 minutes slow. No man paid court. Livestock were never seen, and no one, ever, was welcomed behind the chained shed doors. Still, the townsfolk began to notice something else. Strangers still drifted through Cypress Hollow, hunters, peddlers, itinerant, gamblers, and each found the Thibodeaux cottage a welcome beacon. Ullei greeted them with sugared tea, clean wash water, and a supper that smelled like heaven. None ever lodged complaints. In fact, none were ever seen walking back out. One April evening, a merchant from New Orleans stepped through their door. Weeks later, only his ledger surfaced, wedged in the mud of the bayou. A braggart trapper from Arkansas boasted in the tavern about the bounty his pelts would fetch. His wagon was later found drifting empty as a coffin downstream. Explanations floated just as easily. Took the river south. Ran away with the fancy lady. Men like that never stay put. No one pressed the matter. There was meat on every plate. Ullei strolled the village lanes in crisp skirts and black gloves, handing out neat parcels to widows and weary mothers, always with that gentle smile. Maybel kept to the smokehouse, stoking the fires. Her apron was reddened long before any hog should have met a blade. Children whispered and called her the quiet butcher. Dusk after dusk, soot-black smoke curled skyward like beckoning fingers, and Cypress Hollow feasted. They never asked what churned in the flames. Beneath that slanted roof, beyond a bolted door, another hatch lay hidden. Iron hooks dangled overhead, a stone slab bore rusty shackles, and a ledger listed names in crimson chalk with notes: tender thighs, slow bleed, young, clean, little waste. But no one in town had seen it yet. They only knew the sisters' flavors were magic, and Ullei's coy reply to every recipe request: old family secret. So they chewed slower, dabbed their lips, and even the priest swallowed his questions. Hunger teaches a person which thoughts to starve, and gratitude, seasoned with warm flesh, can bind a whole village in silence. Soon, though, Cypress Hollow would learn that the smoke carried more than oak and pepper. It carried sins simmered low until someone finally tasted the truth. By midsummer 1854, Cypress Hollow prospered inexplicably. Drought and livestock blight ravaged nearby parishes, but every table here gleamed with ribs, chops, and rich stews. God's favor, they said, though not aloud did they wonder how, for no cows lowed, no hogs rooted, no deer stirred the brush. Hunters returned empty-handed, their dogs wary, their snares untouched. Still the sisters' baskets never emptied. Ullei and Maybel looked radiant, never requesting coin, only a whispered blessing or the promise of a future favor. Folks called them saints, angels, said their smokehouse was anointed. Father Henri, young, newly assigned from Baton Rouge, was unconvinced. He'd arrived with 2 years' priesthood, a borrowed cassock, and bright hopes of renewing parish faith. But hope soured. The townsfolk were cordial, yet strangely mute. They ignored the steady trickle of missing travelers. Henry's unease sharpened when old wheelwright Broussard complained over ale. Strangers ride in down, the trade road, but none roll their wagons back to me for repairs. They come, Father, but they don't leave. Old Broussard spat a ribbon of tobacco and growled, "Ask that smokehouse, Father. Folks in Cypress Hollow never go hungry." Henri chalked it up to swamp gossip until he opened the parish register. In just 4 months, 6 travelers were arrived but never departed. A merchant out of Opelousas, a southbound trapper, a mute boy of 14 seeking work, a pregnant woman headed to her sister's, and 2 others whose last stop was the Thibodeaux door. A second pattern surfaced. The sisters hadn't bought a single chicken, pig, or even a slab of bacon from any farmer since spring, yet their chimney puffed day and night. That Sunday, Henri lurked behind the church doors and watched Maybel in her blood-freckled apron set a wicker basket of ribs on the picnic table. Children squealed, mothers applauded, men gnawed the bones clean. Nobody wondered where the meat had come from. Sitting on the church steps after dusk, Henry saw the truth. Cypress Hollow wasn't blessed. It was being bought, one warm, fragrant supper at a time. And whatever the cost, it had already been paid. Later that week, a trader named Elijah Cole rolled in, a flinty, scarred man who boasted he feared no nightmare this side of hell. Henri pulled him aside. "Don't dine with the Thibodeaux," he warned. "Ride straight on." Cole just laughed. "Padre, I've eaten in darker holes than this swamp. 2 generous ladies. I'll risk it." He stepped into the sisters' cottage at sunset. Come dawn, his horse still stood tethered, his wagon still piled high, but Elijah Cole was gone. Townsfolk shrugged, Left before sunrise. Probably took the east road. Henri had walked that road himself. No wheel ruts, no hoof prints, no wagon grooves. That night the chimney belched a thicker plume than ever. The odor drifted through the rectory window, sweet, smoky, tinged with iron. Henri gagged, clutched his crucifix, murmured prayers for Elijah Cole. Next morning, Ullei glided up the church steps bearing parchment-wrapped slices glazed in honey. "For the flock, Father," she said, eyes bright, voice velvet. Henri searched her face for a shadow, a quiver, nothing. She was porcelain serenity. He accepted the tray, waited until nightfall, then knelt in the garden and buried it deep, earth dampening the tremble in his hands. Now he understood. Cypress Hollow didn't want answers. The meat was too tender, the charity too constant, hunger too familiar a pain to invite back. Prayer alone wouldn't cut through this silence. He needed proof he feared to find. He would not wait long. A child was about to disappear, and every doubt the town had swallowed would be swallowed again, this time with screams. Children are warned to steer clear of the woods, not because the trees attack, but because they watch. They remember. 10-year-old Jacques Leroux, skinny, wide-eyed, forever slipping the leash his trapper father kept, knew the swamp's whispers better than his catechism. In Cypress Hollow, every child finds a crack to wriggle through, especially when fog muffles footsteps and grown-ups marinate in their own lies. Nothing tempted Jacques like the Thibodeaux land. Each time Ullei and Maybel delivered those fragrant parcels, each time their chimney exhaled charred secrets, he wondered, where do they find so much meat? He'd never spied a single hog, goat, or hen on their lot, yet the smokehouse never slept. So, one hazy Sunday, while his father snored off a jug of swamp wine, and the village drowsed, Jacques slipped between two cypress trunks and padded toward the sisters' backyard. The smokehouse squatted ahead, boards scorched, hinges crusted in rust, less a building than an old scar nobody dared probe. Jacques crouched and pressed an eye to a warping seam just as a gust thinned the smoke inside. What he saw was no pig. A grown man hung upside down from an iron hook, chest slit in tidy channels, steam coiling from fresh flesh. A bucket caught the slow drip of something dark. Fat hissed where it met the coals. Jacques reeled, a scream clogging his throat. He sprinted home and crashed into his father's arms, babbling of bodies and blood. Half drunk, the man cuffed his ear. "Spying on them ladies. You'll get a whipping for such fibs." But Jacques wouldn't relent. All evening he quaked, repeating what he'd witnessed. By dawn, the boy was gone. Bed slept in, shoes by the door, latch unlifted. Folks murmured he'd run off, scared of his father's temper. Others guessed the swamp swallowed him. Only Father Henri, young priest with too much conscience, suspected otherwise. Henri's ledger now tallied yet another vanished soul. He visited Jacques' father, offered comfort, then ventured the forbidden question, "Did the boy say where he saw the body?" The man hesitated, then croaked, "Behind the smokehouse." I told him he was dreamin'. Words died on Henri's tongue. The sisters' chimney was already puffing, its black plume smug against the dawn. That night, Henri paced the nave barefoot, murmuring rosaries while fog pressed the stained glass like patient wraiths. He knew prayer alone wouldn't cut it. He needed proof he prayed did not exist. Next day, a trader, Elijah Cole, rolled into town, hard-eyed, leather-skinned, afraid of nothing. Henri cornered him. "Don't lodge with the Thibodeaux. Don't taste their food. Cole chuckled. "Father, I've dined in worse hellholes. 2 kind ladies won't spook me." At dusk, he stepped through the sisters' door. Come morning, his horse still tethered, wagon still laden. Elijah Cole was smoke. Townsfolk shrugged, headed out before dawn. Henri knew better. No wheel ruts on the east road, no hoofprints, only a thicker, sweeter plume from the smokehouse chimney. The Au rectory stank of sugared ham mingled with copper. Henri gagged and prayed for Elijah's soul. Ullei visited the church next day, offering parchment-wrapped slices glazed with honey. For the flock, she purred. Henri searched her porcelain face for a crack, saw none. He accepted the tray, then under night's cloak buried it deep in the church garden, soil swallowing his shaking hands. Cypress Hollow didn't want truth. The sisters' charity was too delicious. Hunger had taught the village what questions never to ask. But Father Henri needed proof, and feared he'd soon get it. He did. A fortnight later, a ragged satchel surfaced in reeds behind the smokehouse, Jacques'. Inside, a slingshot, a whittled toy soldier, a strip of linen stiff with blood. The sheriff muttered, "Boys lose things." Henri held his tongue, eyes fixed on the chimney's lazy, satisfied swirl. That night, he watched the candle gutter on his sill and whispered for a child whose only sin was peeking at what grown-ups chose to forget. And somewhere in the fog, the trees listened, remembering everything. The smoke kept climbing, plates kept filling, and Cypress Hollow kept its silence, because once a tongue learns pleasure that deep, it trains the mind to forget the cost. No one noticed when Father Henri slipped away the morning he chose to breach the Thibodeaux cottage. The swamp air pressed like a damp cloth on the throat. Everyone moved slow, lulled by heat and habit. At dawn, the sisters had already glided to market, baskets swinging, smiles bright. Henri had trailed them for weeks, waiting. Now, with their porch vacant and curtains drawn, he crossed the churchyard, slipped behind the hollow oak, and melted into the shadowed pines. Up close, the whitewashed cottage looked less like a sanctuary and more like a snare dressed in lace. He circled once, then slid the steel tip of his crucifix between jamb and lock. Click. The door sighed open. Inside, a hush deeper than any grave. Lavender and sweet smoke lingered together, perfume and sin in one breath. Every surface gleamed, herbs dried in neat bundles. A mantel portrait showed 2 riverbank girls in ghost-white dresses. Henri hunted an hour. Kitchen, bedrooms, pantry shelves aligned like hymnals. Outside, the smokehouse revealed no trapdoor, no stack of bones, only soot-cloaked timbers. Despair gnawed his resolve until, in Maybel's room, he noticed a rocking chair resting a hair off-center. Beneath it, a board with a deliberate sliver of space. The crucifix's blade pried the plank loose. A leather journal lay inside, slick from humid years. On the opening leaf, elegant script, not for God, not for guilt, only for remembering. Henri turned pages. Name, date, notes, Amos Talbert, April 1847. Bitter, aged, screamed too long. Hilda Ross, July 1849. Fat, perfect. Fever beforehand, irrelevant. Josiah Pine, May 1850. Robust flavor, required extra tendering, worth it. Baby G, January 1851. Wouldn't stop crying, brine wasted. Ink blurred here and there, yet every victim stood plain as day, until the final entry, letters still wet. Jacques Leroux, Sept. 1854. Curious, thin, but sweet, quiet, minimal struggle. Henri snapped the book shut, lungs clawing for air. Horror and nausea warred inside him, but instinct took charge. journal under coat, floorboard replaced, door relocked, footprints erased. Back in the rectory he barred the doors, lit every candle, and trembled before the altar. Which chilled him deeper, that the sisters butchered innocence, or that they chronicled it with the poise of master artisans. At dawn, he walked to the weather-beaten home of Reverend Arnold, pastor emeritus of the parish. The elder opened the door in a threadbare robe, eyes rheumy with sleep. Henri placed the journal in his hands. Arnold read in brittle silence, page after page, until one line froze him. Tobias Arnaud, November 1838. Color drained from his cheeks. That was my nephew, the old man whispered, voice splintering like rotted pew wood. Whispers traveled faster than sermons. By dusk, everyone in Cypress Hollow had heard that Father Henri claimed the Thibodeaux smokehouse was more slaughter-shed than blessing. Yet supper still simmered. Hunger still ruled. No torches, no confrontation, just longer stares at that soot-black chimney. Next dawn, Henri awoke to a tidy parcel on the church stoop, butcher's paper, red ribbon, and a single bone-white button resting on the top. Jack's button. He burned the bundle in the rectory garden. Greasy flames licked the night air like accusations. Weeks later, harvest failed. Fish scarce, deer vanished, bean pods hollow, swamp air sagged with sweet rot. And still the sisters announced their annual Flood Eve feast. Lanterns glowed behind the chapel. Families arrived with dusty biscuits and weak molasses. Fiddles scratched out hymn tunes. But the main kettle, as always, belonged to Ullei and Maybel. They ladled a dark, perfumed stew. The aroma, smoke, onion, something richer, wrapped around the crowd. Maybel's pale lips twitched each time she filled a bowl. Father Henri stood beneath the oak, hands clenched, watching neighbors slurp and sigh with blissful gratitude. Then a woman gasped. She spit something hard into her palm, a bone-white button chipped at the rim, identical to the one Henri had consigned to fire. It had once fastened the ragged coat of old Silas, the drifter who'd begged at the chapel, then vanished without farewell. Henri stepped forward, voice cold and steady. "This is no beef." Fiddles faltered. Laughter died. "This stew," he said, "was a man, a soul we ignored." Ullei's smile barely wavered. "Father, the heat has taxed you. Come, eat. Restore your strength." "I've seen the ledger," Henri answered. Names, dozens, cooked into silence. Faces in the crowd shifted from confusion to disbelief. Mayor Rouland rose, calm yet cutting. "You'd brand 2 women, our benefactors, as murderers because of a trinket." Henri's eyes swept the tables. "Because of missing travelers, a vanished boy, flesh no animal carries." A farmer muttered, "You refuse to bless the meal. Maybe you've lost your flock." Maybel set down her ladle. Ullei folded gloved hands. "We open our home to every hungry mouth," she said, voice velvet. "But slander closes doors." Silence hung, thicker than swamp fog. Lanterns hissed. Somewhere in the kettle a chunk of meat bobbed to the surface, white gristle gleaming like a grin. And for the first time, Cypress Hollow sensed the price of its endless plenty. Even now, with stew cooling in half-emptied bowls and an ivory button gleaming in the dirt, Ullei let tears purl at the corners of her eyes. Whether grief or theater, no one could say. Beside her, Maybel folded inward, wringing blood-flecked fingers like a scolded child. The murmurs rose, but their direction changed, not toward the sisters, but toward Father Henri. For years, those 2 women had brought warmth, flavor, and unblinking smiles. Henri offered sermons, and accusations no stomach wished to digest. Everyone understood the real cost of believing him. They would have to admit they had swallowed it, too. When sin tastes that sweet, you either rinse it with truth or drown in denial. Henry turned away, cassock snapping in the breeze. Behind him, plates refilled, quieter now, yet still refilled. That night, he sat alone in candlelight, the ledger cradled on his knees. One by one, he breathed the names, Amos, Hilda, Josiah, Baby G, Jacques, and felt each syllable drop like lead. Outside, the chimney glowed ember red, and far off the lullaby Maybel always hummed fluttered through the cypress like a hush song for the dead. Faith, Henri realized, would not be enough. By the third night after the feast, Cypress Hollow had chosen. They would not act. The truth was too raw, the meat too tender. If justice were to come, it must be seized, not begged for. Henri watched the sisters 2 days, where they walked, when they locked doors, the path behind the smokehouse where vines hid an old lean-to. That, he reasoned, was the real altar. At sunset Sunday, he stripped off his collar, dusted mud on his cassock, and scuffed his boots until he looked like any road-worn traveler. Dusk pooled violet over the swamp as he limped up the Thibodeaux lane, head bowed. When Maybel opened the door, he kept his gaze low. "Evenin' lost the river track," he muttered. "Might you have a corner and a swallow for a tired man?" Maybel blinked, then smiled soft as milk. "Poor soul. Come in. We never refuse the hungry." She settled him beside the hearth, poured a cup of fragrant tea, cloudy sweet in a way that coated the tongue. Laudanum? Valerian? Belladonna? Henri swirled it, raised it, then let it slip from his grip as though sleep claimed him mid-sip. His head thudded against the armrest. Lids drooped to a slit. Through that thin curtain he watched. Ullei entered soundless, apron folded over her arm, a narrow blade flashing beneath the cloth. "He'll keep," she murmured. "Lean," Maybel replied, eyes hooded. "But preacher tongues are always sugar." Together, they lifted his arms with bridal gentleness, arranging him like a groom for some macabre nuptial. Henry's pulse hammered, yet he remained slack, breath thin and measured. Ullei bent close, whispering against his ear, "Better when they don't fight. The meat confesses less." That was the spark. Henri's eyes snapped wide. He heaved both women backward. Maybel struck the wall and crumpled. Before either sister could recover, he bolted through the parlor, kicked the rear door, and sprinted into the leaning shed. The reek inside was not rot. It was something far worse. Antiseptic, intentional, as though death here were practiced art, not slaughter. Hooks clattered along every wall, iron loops, dripping chains, gutting knives honed thin as moonlight. A drain yawned in the center like a black mouth, and in one shadowed corner sat a cedar chest, the wood blotched dark, buzzing with flies. Henri did not need to lift the lid. Truth already crawled beneath his skin. He struck a match, dropped it onto the grease-soaked planks. Flame raced wild. In a heartbeat, the smokehouse flared like tindered bone. Henri stepped outside, eyelids searing, but he held his ground. From inside rose shrieks, layered, countless, neither beast nor woman, but a chorus of every voice the smoke had swallowed. Over that din rang the Thibodeaux sisters, shrill and furious. "You stole our flock, our blessed flesh." Roof beams caved, sparking embers spiraled into the swamp night, orange fireflies dying midair. Villagers arrived, buckets, pitchforks, bare hands, only to stand frozen as the structure roared itself clean. Nothing was spoken. By dawn, the miracle smokehouse was a ribcage of charcoal slats. The brick chimney still coughed thin gray sighs. Sheriff Lejeune scrawled a single sentence: lightning, accidental, no questions. Father Henri slipped away 48 hours later, singed Bible and soot-stained ledger in a grain sack. Behind him, Cypress Hollow began to decay, not from hunger, but from memory. Some fires do not purify, they illuminate. Yet the blaze was not the ending. When daylight scattered the final cinders, the ground beneath the ruins sagged open, as though breath escaped the earth itself. One by one, townsfolk crept forward. Skeptics, hopefuls, deniers. They ringed the black crater in silence, then a gasp. A child's rib cage, scorched yet whole, protruded from loosened soil like a small, pleading hand. Nearby, a femur thick as a fence post. A skull, jaw agape in an eternal scream. And glinting beside it, a dented gold ring. Martha Louvière sank to her knees, lifted the band with trembling fingers. "Jacob's," she choked. "Papa gave it to him at 17. They swore he drowned, but he feared the bayou." Faces blanched. Hats came off. A gray-bearded farmer murmured, "Billy stopped at their door, askin' work. Never saw him again." A woman clutched her apron. "My aunt from Baton Rouge said their roast melted like butter. She went home. We thought—" Her voice broke. Another voice. I once heard a swamp saying, "Fire eats wood, but smoke eats memory." Cypress Hollow learned that lesson the hard way. The blaze that gutted the Thibodeaux smokehouse in August of '54 burned hot enough to melt iron hinges and curl cypress planks like paper. Yet it could not cauterize the taste, still lodged on every tongue. It could not cauterize shame. In the raw weeks afterward, the settlement did not breathe so much as wince. Porch rockers stopped creaking at dusk. Mosquitoes droned louder than talk. Suppers arrived lukewarm, barely touched. No matter what meat lay on the tin plates, squirrel, duck, even stringy possum, every chew felt like chewing confession. By day, the charred lot was roped with crimson twine, a black tooth in the soil. By night, lanterns swung there, placed by families who could not decide whether the ground was a grave or an altar. Folks whispered that the sisters' ashes still drifted among the vines, looking for mouths to fill. Father Henri remained just long enough to do what duty required. 11 pine coffins, no names, only numbers, were lowered into a corner of fallow field. He read a psalm that tasted like dust, then hammered each cross himself. No consecration. The ground would not have it. The wood markers leaned before the week was done, as though even they were ashamed to stand. When townspeople asked why only 11, Henri's eyes dimmed. "Because that is all the earth surrendered," he answered, and nobody pressed him further. That night, he lit 11 candles on the tiny chapel altar. For each flame, he spoke a name the town had tried to swallow: Jacob, Silas, Baby G, Hilda, Amos. 11 sparks against a dark that felt deeper than swamp water. Wax pooled. Henri's voice cracked. At the final name he said, "Forgive us the hunger that made accomplices of us all." Then he snuffed the candles with his fingertips, left the chapel door ajar, and let the wind carry the smoke out. 2 dawns later, he packed no more than a Bible speckled with grease stains, and a rope-bound ledger he vowed never to open again. He did not ring the church bell, did not lock the door. He simply walked down the sunken road until the mist folded him away. Some say he headed for New Orleans. Others swear they saw him years later, preaching temperance in Kansas. Doesn't matter. The weight he hauled was heavier than any parish. But stories, like swamp water, seep. Rail hands carried hushed accounts up the Red River. Traders repeated the Cannibal Sisters under breath in Shreveport, saloons. By winter, the tale had reached Baton Rouge, stripped to sinew but alive. Most listeners spat and called it hogwash, yet they salted their meat a little heavier that night, just in case. Back in Cypress Hollow, the land soured. Crops yellowed. The spring ran cloudy. Some blamed heaven. Most blamed themselves. Within 3 years, half the cabins stood empty, their owners gone to higher, kinder ground. The church roof caved. Ivy crawled over the 11 crosses until they looked like green question marks. Hunters reported hearing a lullaby, Maybel's syrup-slow hum, drifting through fog where no voice should travel. The smokehouse ruins sank inch by inch until only a black rectangle marked the spot. Children, those few still born there, were warned. Step on that shadow and the hunger follows you home. They stepped anyway. Curiosity is a beast with its own appetite. Decades passed, maps changed. Cypress Hollow became a ghost scribble on parish surveys, then vanished altogether. But the curse traveled. In roadside diners from Opelousas to Mobile, an old cook might tap his cleaver twice, clack, clack, then mutter, "Check the smoke, son. If it smells too sweet, run." And somewhere far beyond Louisiana marsh, a weary priest wakes at night tasting copper on his teeth, hearing children recite a menu he never wrote. He sits up, lights one candle, never more, and prays into the hollow air that tomorrow's supper, wherever it is served, will not cost another silence. Because once you have dined with monsters, you spend the rest of your life counting bones, on the plate, in the soil, in the soul. And in the end, you learn the terrible arithmetic of appetite. Fire may eat wood. Smoke may eat memory. But hunger eats everything. Where he roamed, Savannah, Baton Rouge, Mobile, people sensed him long before they learned his name. He arrived the way smoke drifts after a blaze, unseen yet inhaled. Every stop was a repeat performance. He'd rent a lean-to at the town's fringe, stay 3 nights at most, and by the second dusk, boarders began to dream. The visions always started with that smell. Slow-cured meat, mouth-watering yet wrong, as if the smoke carried bones in its memory. Then came the images, a child reciting grace, tiny teeth cupped like pearls, a cellar latch that refused to stay barred. More than once a landlady hammered on his door, frantic. "You were crying out, Father, listing names, begging." Henri never explained. He bowed, offered a hoarse blessing, and vanished before sunrise. Whispers followed him down every rail line. There's a priest who travels alone. He drags night terrors behind him like tin cans. Food curdles after his grace, don't sample it. And still he wandered, trying to outrun a hunger that wasn't even his. Back in Cypress Hollow, the earth surrendered. Kudzu strangled the lane, the chapel warped. The sheriff packed his ledger and fled upriver. The smoke-scarred clearing was ringed with rusted wire, but no one dared clear the debris. A final infant was born blind, screaming for 7 days until silence felt like mercy. Cartographers began leaving the settlement off their atlases. But its refugees carried a second tongue, one that twitched whenever fat hissed in a skillet, one that gagged when hickory smoke rose too sweet. Some sought out Henri years later, confessing beneath flickering lamps. "I relished it," slurred one shame-soaked farmer. "Didn't know what it was, but, Lord, I cleaned the plate." Another wept. "I dream of Miss Ullei holding a platter. She smiles, and I wake starving." The ugliest admission came as a whisper. "On cold nights, I crave that flavor." Near the end, Henri braved the swamp road once more. Weeds lapped at his ribs. He found the 11 crosses half eaten by rot, lit a lone candle, anchored it in the black soil, and spoke 4 brittle words. May you be forgotten. Turning to leave, he caught it. Not speech, not spirit, but wind through dead cane, humming a kitchen lullaby. Maybel's lullaby. Locals swear the tune lingers. Stand where the smokehouse stood, when fog clings low and the moon is dull nickel, and you'll hear it too. A hush of blades, the soft rhythm of chewing. Some claim 2 forms drift between the cypress, one erect, one hunched, baskets swaying on their arms. And butchers in neighboring towns still lose slabs overnight, discover fresh stacks of pecan wood gone. No chronicle records Cypress Hollow. School primers omit it. No marker guards the site. Yet the tale survives in murmurs and in gullets that once swallowed gratitude faster than suspicion. The Thibodeaux sisters are ash on the wind, but the flavor, God help us, never leaves. So, if you ever find yourself deep in Louisiana's low country and the night wind carries the perfume of smoke and brown sugar, stop. Listen. If you hear a woman humming a cradle song no mother should know, turn back while your shadow is still your own. History loves to bury its monsters, but monsters aren't earthbound. They ride on stories, hiding in recipes, waiting for another mouth too hungry to ask where supper came from. Remember the Thibodeaux sisters, whenever generosity tastes just a little too sweet, whenever a village praises miracles that arrive gift-wrapped and free of charge. Because evil seldom kicks down the front door. It knocks politely, offers seconds, and thanks you for the company. And the moment you swallow without question, you've already set another place at its table. If this tale left a scorch in your throat, feed the algorithm the way Cypress Hollow once fed itself. Press like, share the feast with a friend, and ring the bell so you never miss the next course in our banquet of buried horrors. Until then, keep your appetite honest, keep your questions sharp, and above all, never trust a smokehouse that never runs out of meat.